Welcome everybody. This is our first time being on the road for Coffee Talk. So we're usually in Minnesota and we flew all the way to Portland just to meet my friend Sage. No, there's other stuff going on. We're happy to be in Portland. We actually get to be at Seijen's house and super excited to talk with an old friend. Our paths cross through work, but I've been following Seijen and he's just gone all over the world basically, doing similar work to myself, but I can't wait to learn about his journey and about his point of view on topics around design research, around human-centered design. Seijen's been with me at Target. He's also been at Strava, doing some incredible things. Currently at Nike, had a stint at US Bank, 3M, and I'm excited to hear about all these journey stops and the things he brought to the world. He's probably most famous in my mind now for creating the leaderboard, local legends, the segment leaderboards at Strava and local legends at Strava. So anyone that rides a bike or runs or does exercise using Strava and likes the segment leaderboards and the local legends, you can thank Seijen.
I did not create them.
I
want to make that really clear. I did help shape their evolution.
That's a great way to put it, shape them.
I influenced their evolution. I contributed.
Yes, you're right. There's usually a big team that we work with. So, shaped these things. Seijen, let's hear a little bit about you. We do the standard introduction of Jekyll and Hyde, like your day and your night persona. So your title during the day and then your title at night. How would you answer that?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for coming over to the house. I'm sorry that Portland didn't give you a little bit of a sunnier day. Tomorrow it will be, and you'll get to see it in its full beauty. But thanks for inviting me to the conversation.
Yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde. Okay, so during the day, as you mentioned, I'm a human who happens to work for Nike. Until pretty recently, I was leading what we called experience research or UX research for Nike stores. So thinking about the user experience, kind of with a focus on what we called the four walls and in was the main kind of scope of our work. So that encompassed kind of conceptual creative topics about look and feel and the tone you want to convey in a given store format or something like that, all the way down to like the nitty-gritty details of the words or the visuals on a tiny sign underneath a shoe on a wall full of shoes, for example. We also broached into experiences like buy online, pick up in store, and the transition from digital places like websites or apps to brick and mortar experiences. And we also worked on enabling the associates in stores. We call them store athletes. So how do you help them help the broader athletes in the world, right? Because at Nike, we say if you have a body, you're an athlete. So that was until pretty recently. Now my title is Director of Macro and Competitive Intelligence. And to put it into contrast, where until recently I was looking at those little tiny signs, now looking at things from a much more macro level and trying to put human behavior and human choice into really broad context and understand all the forces at play in the kind of macroeconomic world and the retail industry world and how that's guiding people kind of one way or another in terms of why they're buying or why they're running or doing those sorts of things. So different altitude now than it was a few months ago.
Absolutely. Okay, your Hyde, your night. After you take off your work hat.
Yeah, after I take off my work hat. Okay. My wife, I'm sure that she did not coin this term, but she has called me dad mode recently because I'm absolutely full on in dad mode after hours. We were talking beforehand about how it's funny how before you have kids, kind of how side projects are a possibility, and right now less so for us. But I am a happy dad. We have two kids, one who's almost 4, one who is about 8 months old now. I'm a husband to my wife Jessica. We actually met at Target, so yes, there's romance in those walls. I like to say in dad mode, we have our strengths, and my strengths as parents, I should say. We have strengths as parents, and my strengths are being the calendar keeper. I make the meals. I'm the dishwasher, the groundskeeper in terms of like planting plants and flowers. We've been trying really hard to take advantage of Portland's very moderate weather to grow flowers and try different things in the garden. And I call myself the lead snack packer too, and that applies to not just the kids, to all of us. So, and while I can try to get outside and be active and still run, not as much as I used to. Still running is still a really important part of my identity, but I don't get to run as much as I used to, nor am I as fit as I used to be. So, yeah, that's kind of my after hours personality, I guess you'd say.
We ask that a lot just to get the full picture of people because we're not just our work. What the heck do we do? Like, I am struggling a bit with, are we calling this human-centered design? Do we do design research? Is this innovation? I've always struggled with the words in our fields. And I feel that you and I do very similar things because we both started in insights and we do research. I'm curious, and I'm going off script.
That's okay.
If you've thought of this, what is it that you do? And what words do you use to describe what you and I think both do, which are similar things, and there's not good words yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have thought about it, and where I'm leaning towards right now in terms of responding to this question is actually, I've actually tried to free myself of words, if that makes sense, as of late. Because I think that, and I've experienced this now at kind of multiple steps in my career, as soon as you put a title on things, it often pulls you into a not productive conversation about like, well, what is user experience versus customer experience, for example, or I don't know, like that is one that sticks out in my mind, and all of a sudden now you're debating semantics rather than exploring like what is the work that needs to be done, and more importantly, like what is the action that we're trying to enable, what is the choice that we are trying to unlock or clarify. How do we build confidence in a situation of ambiguity or complexity? So I've tried really hard actually to almost avoid maybe the title trap, for lack of a better term, and really start to understand like what is, like let's talk about it in terms of the outcomes we're trying to drive. And actually my current situation is a great example of that, because this change in altitude of like designing a sign or designing a layout or guiding the enterprise with big picture shifts. Sure, we're using different tool sets, but we're applying the same kind of analytical thinking to help guide that. I'm actively thinking about, how do you take, what do you want to call it, indicators like inflation or the consumer price index or unemployment, or these big kind of abstract numbers that feel important because you read them in the news and so on and so forth, but how do you internalize that inside of a company and really make someone feel why that number is important, and why it affects your average family in a meaningful way. And so like that to me is still a human-centered take on a different type of analysis than watching someone walk through a store and trying to make their wayfinding easier, right? Both human-centered, just slightly different tool sets, slightly different outcomes, right? Slightly different actions that you're trying to drive. So I guess like maybe that's me dodging your question a little bit and saying like I haven't found for myself a lot of I don't know what I call it, like productive conversations about that, like internally, rather than trying to say like, hey, let's talk about what you're trying to do. And then we can figure out the best way to help you do that. And we happen to be part of an organization that has the word insights in it, for example. So
awesome. Yeah. I like that. Let's see. So with that question, how do you describe what you do? Let's say a 4-year-old, or like really simplify the steps that you take to do your job, or that are key steps of your mindset in your process.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to talk about it, right? I think the first step, if I'm thinking about it from a 4-year-old, is like listening, watching, asking questions. They're already really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually feeling, despite when dad and mom are like, stop asking why, like actually asking why repeatedly to try and understand someone else's point of view or someone else's perspective. I think it's funny to put it from the perspective of a 4-year-old because I have an almost 4-year-old, and so he's been doing normal 4-year-old things, and some of those normal 4-year-old things are not exactly kind, and so we've been asking really a lot lately, kind of like, well, how do you think so and so felt? Like when you did that, how do you think that made them feel? How do you feel when someone does that to you? Kind of a similar situation, I guess, right? It's like, oh, when that person did that thing, or when you observe this thing out in the world, like how do you think that made them feel? Like why do you think they felt that way? I think a lot of this work is just asking questions, listening, observing, reflecting, like writing things down, and kind of writing them down in a way that isn't jumping to trying to take action necessarily yet. But ultimately, that is the next step, right? It's like saying, okay, so what does, after all this listening and asking questions, like what should I do? Like how can I make them feel differently? How can I make them feel better? And trying to do something, I guess. To put it in super plain English, you try to do something based on what you heard or what you saw, and then being open to someone, or being open to being wrong. Is maybe the way to put it. And again, like tying it back to, we're sitting in my dining room, over there is my living room, there's a bunch of Legos and Manga tiles over there, you can't see behind the couch, and one of the things we've been dealing with lately is when the Manga tiles fall apart and sadness occurs.
Yes.
And we always say, what the great thing about Manga tiles is that you can always rebuild it and always try again. And it feels like that applies to this world too, right? Like you listen, you try to do something about it, be open to being wrong, and then try again. And that's kind of how I think about the work, and even how I think about my role as a manager, right? It's like you listen to your team, you try to do something about it, be open to being wrong, try again. And hopefully at some point in time you're not wrong anymore, or at least you're less wrong.
Yeah. Seijen, that feels like revolutionary, to being open to being wrong. I know it's so easy for you to say, and I think it's easy for you to do in your job. But like, if we think of business 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that was never okay. And I do think that represents a real shift in our culture and our business culture.
Yeah, it's pretty, I'll speak about this from a couple levels. It's pretty uncomfortable. I don't want to sound like arrogant, but like I consider myself a high achiever. Like I'm always pursuing my best, and when I don't get my best, that's a frustrating moment. And so like the idea of saying out loud, like be open to being wrong, has for me personally been a journey, I guess you could say. And feedback and being open to feedback is something I've actively worked on over the course of my career and have incorporated now into like, I try to incorporate it systematically into like all of my interactions with like my team and my direct reports and the people around me. It's just like getting open to asking the question, like, do you have any feedback for me? Like, what can I be doing to make your life better? And that's not to say I'm going to be able to do it all, right? This notion of like desirability versus viability. Like, I understand what you want, and I hear you, and I acknowledge your feelings, and that is a totally valid perspective to have. And also, I can't do that, or it's not as easy as it sounds, But that's absolutely something that I've had to like actively work on my mindset around over the course of time, and from a more, I guess, organizational standpoint, you talk about companies like Target, you talk about companies like Nike, like super high standards, like ridiculously high standards when it comes to things like brand and brand experience and perceptions, right? So half-baked things don't always fly. And so that's a pretty hard cultural force, I think, to fight against, I guess you could say. I don't want to make it adversarial, but just to be part of, right? To feel, and at the same time you're trying to encourage like an openness to iterate and improve over time.
Yeah, that's really neat. I've been thinking about that too. Your favorite human-centered design, problem-solving evidence in the world, or like companies, products, where you're just like, that's why we do what we do, or somebody's really been thinking about this. Are there products, services where you're impressed and you're like, this is a really good example, and they did their homework?
Yeah, interesting. The ones, so there's two that come to mind as being, I don't know, one is very practical in terms of my current life, and one is a little more inspirational, I guess. So the current one is actually Casper, but not the mattress business. Actually, they're like accessories business. I feel like it's very quiet, and I don't know exactly why, but they make a nightlight, which admittedly is like a slightly more expensive light than probably a lot of people have the means to buy. But the problems, I feel like, when you're like, and I'm thinking about this, right, because I have a 4-year-old who wakes up a lot in the middle of the night for various bio needs, and turning on lights in the middle of the night, like when I do it with him, he always like freaks out and is like, so bright, and it just totally disrupts like what should be hopefully as like low key an experience as possible. Like, you do not want to awaken them any more than they have to be awakened, right? So we were looking at nightlights, and I stumbled upon this Casper nightlight, which is like, first of all, it's got two settings, but the light itself is like wall facing. So it, like, instead of shining the light out into the room, it actually shines it against the wall to create kind of a more ambient lighting, which is just softer on the eyes, like when you walk into that room. And then, so that was great. And then secondly, there's a setting that is basically motion detect. It's just motion detection, but it like brightens the light kind of. It's not an immediate turn on. It's like a gradual kind of ascension, I guess you could say, of brightness. Arguably still a little bit too bright for our needs, I guess, but in that moment, it still is like quite helpful. For me as an adult, it's been fine. For the kid, it's a little bit still too bright. But so we changed it back to that first setting, and it's been great. And we've been able to kind of put one next to his little potty in his room, and one in the bathroom, and I don't know if it's totally solved the problem. I don't know if our expectation should be that it's going to solve the problem per se, but it's been helpful for us dealing with that in the middle of the night. So, yeah, a little small one. In contrast, if we're talking about baby products, to Dr. Brown's bottles, which are like each bottle is like 5 pieces, right, or 4 pieces. And the bottle itself works great for our daughter. Cleaning those things is the worst. It is literally the bane of my existence right now. Every night when we get 7 bottles back from daycare, and I'm like, oh, this is like, what? It's not actually 30 minutes, but it feels like 30 minutes of washing little tiny pieces and trying to wash these things. I'm like, the bottle's not the problem, but like, hey, Dr. Brown's like, create something like help us clean it faster. Like, that's all I want, something that I can, I don't know, do it in mass, like batch clean. Awesome. That would be my dream.
Do you feel like you look at the world? I feel like I look at the world in this way, where it's like, I appreciate good design, but then when it's not good design, I'm like exceptionally frustrated, because I know in our fields we try to limit the number of friction points. Yep.
Yeah, I do. I was thinking about it though before we talked, and I actually find myself like just generally getting less frustrated and less excited both when I encounter like, I guess like I haven't found myself saying to myself like, wow, that was an amazing experience, or wow, that was a horrible experience, like very much recently, which makes me wonder if that is a like product of the growth of human-centered design over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, right? And it's just like, oh, okay, the baseline has actually risen, and therefore like the bimodal emotions that we used to experience however many years ago are like just kind of coming more to the center. I don't know.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. I think when you and I both started, it was a really new field to take this lens into problem solving, but it feels much more common.
Yeah. I don't know. I I struggled to think of like really triggering experiences.
The airport?
The airport isn't great, but like I guess I just have set my expectations to be like, yeah, you know, this is just not going to be great.
You like adults to yell at you when you pay $500 to get on a plane?
Yeah, maybe not,
and
but
take off your shoes because you're never doing it right.
We are. I mean, admittedly, we are like incredibly optimized. Like we've thought through all of those like little things with 2 kids, and so it's just like, okay, like this bag is for this bag is for this. There's a strap around this thing, like this stroller, like it's all in there. And so, like, yes, to your point, could be significantly better. We've created workarounds.
You have?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We've created workarounds, you know.
Because I'm still like, there's got to be a better way than adults yelling at adults to take your shoes off and take out your laptops.
I think the one that is, like, really triggering for me, and I don't interact with it very frequently, but it is, like, it's bad, is the Verizon store.
Ooh.
Like... There was a time, I want to say last year, where I had to replace my phone, and I put it off for so long because I did not want to go to the Verizon store. And for whatever reason, like trying to buy a phone online at that time, it was like, because I was trying to get the deal, you know, and the website is never like great at explaining like, what are you actually committing to and all this stuff. So like, I'm just going to go to the store. And at one point, especially as someone who at that time was working in brick and mortar experiences, there was literally a moment where the associate, and this is not their fault, but the associate trying to check me out or service me had a mobile device in one hand, a tablet in another. There was a computer in the back room and a kiosk. And between the 4 of these devices, they were trying to kind of make the transaction proceed. And I was like, what is going on right now? And he would disappear into the back room to like come back and print with a stack of papers and print, okay, here are the terms, whatever. I'm like, okay, now we're gonna go to the kiosk and do this. Oh, the kiosk isn't working. I was just like, and was supposed to be 45 minutes, you know, it was like double, which I knew was gonna happen, or at least I thought was gonna happen, and sure enough, you know.
Wow.
So it was pretty frustrating. And, so if I can avoid going to the Verizon store, I absolutely will do so.
So as a kind of, who does it well, or how have you worked on, and you don't have to be specific.
On those in-store experiences.
Friction points.
There's
a place that does it really well.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think. The ones that come to memory, I mean, Apple comes to mind, but I don't want to go down the Apple cliche path, I guess. I've had really positive experiences at Bonobos, men's clothing store. And maybe that's because their brick and mortar locations are showrooms. Mm-hmm. Like they are designed to be showrooms from the get-go. And so the store associates that are there, especially if you've ordered from them over time, like I have now, you walk in, they know who you are. They know what you've purchased.
How do they know who you are?
Well, not immediately.
Okay.
Well, partially because if you've thought in advance, you've created an appointment, and so then they know.
No, really.
But they can easily look you up on the spot if you have an account, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, hey Seijen, like okay, like here's your closet from Bonobos. Here are all the things you've ordered." And I think what could be tricky with a company like Bonobos, like their whole value prop is sizes, like range of sizes. They get thin cut or slim cut to kind of, I don't know, like bigger cuts or more roomy cuts. And so the whole point is like whatever your body as a man is, like we have clothing to kind of fit you in a flattering way. So if you don't remember if you got slim fit or not slim fit last time, or was I a small regular fit or a medium slim fit, they can go back and look at your, what you've purchased from in the past and be like, oh, here's what you've got in the past, here are the colors you bought in the past. Like, okay, now let's go look at the current season and figure out, what's right for you and try things on and so on. So again, maybe it's because it's a showroom experience, right? It doesn't need to do as much, I guess, or it can be more specialized in how it thinks about things. But I think that from my personal perspective, I've only had positive experiences at Bonobos brick and mortar. So
I like that example. Mm-hmm. Sage, you're somebody in my professional career who has done a lot of incredible different things. Can you walk us through the highlights of where you've been and what you're doing? I mean, the fact that you worked in banking, to Nike, to be at the White House once with a hydroponic plant all the way to, I mean, you've just done so many fascinating things. I don't even know where to start, but I want our listeners to get to hear your journey when they think about just a career in this and what it could be, and all the different kind of places you've touched. So, I mean, start from the beginning if you don't mind.
Yeah, I can. I will do my best to be concise.
Okay.
And I guess stop me and jump in.
I will. I promise.
Probe on anything if you want. I'm going to start before the professional career, actually, because I think there's a couple bits of context that either consciously or subconsciously like influenced the journey. So the first is actually like my parents and my name. So Seijen means international person in Japanese. My dad is from Japan. My mom was born in New York City, but her first language actually as a kid was Greek. Her parents were both from Greece. And so like, I think that's like maybe a subconscious level of importance, because less the literal translation of like international and more the consideration of being really sensitive to different cultures and aware of differences in people. Not for the purposes of like saying, well, you belong over here, you belong over here, right? But just to say like, oh, like there exists nuance. How I operate in this context is not the same as how this group of people operates in this context. So maybe a better way of saying it is very aware to cultural context. Even, within the United States, right? Portland versus Minneapolis, something like that. So that's like one bit that like sent me on my way. Fast forward to college, and I was studying advertising, and was really attracted to like the creative side of advertising, right? And I think, I can't remember exactly when Mad Men came out, but like at the time, as a college kid, like having the opportunity to work on big sexy ads, Super Bowl things was very exciting. Partway through that program, I had like a little bit of a identity crisis, I guess you could say, and I was struggling with what felt like a very, what's the word, like not tangible, concrete field. Like creativity, right? Creativity's not, it's very difficult to measure, right? It's very difficult to say like, well, I studied creativity for 10 years and now I am this much more creative, I don't think it's quite like that. And I was also like I was at the University of Minnesota, I was a track and field athlete and long distance runner. And the more you run, the better you get at running. Like it's for the most part, especially for more or less. So I think there was this like tension I was feeling. So then I started to study French, because French was similar. The more you study French, the better you get at French. And then that collision point of language, second language, with creativity, I think only compounded that cultural sensitivity that I had. I was like, oh yeah, like there are phrases and words in French that literally do not translate into English, right? And then you start to ask yourself, well, what other things don't translate? Like, and not just words, but behaviors or cultures or things like that. And then you combine that with your creativity and you think, well, whoa, okay, like what ideas does this spark in you? How would I operate differently in these places? So I don't know if I knew it at the time, but like all those things were kind of leading me down the path. And so I started my career in brand strategy at agencies for a very short period of time. That I started at Fallon in Minneapolis as an intern. And, that was a really cool and exciting place to be at, and they still exist and around and do really cool work. I love the RV spots, it's great. Then moved into digital agency life, and it was, I think what was interesting about that, I moved to Chicago and worked for a company called Sapient, sort of Sapient Nitro, now Publicis.Sapient. That was an important stop on the journey because, especially in the context of human-centered design. So at that time, there were not many universities that acknowledged the existence of like a formal discipline that could be called human-centered design or user-centered design. Illinois Institute of Technology is one of those institutions. They had something called the Institute of Design. And this was also the time when IDEO was like really kind of taking off. Yeah. And in Chicago, there was a studio kind of similar to IDEO called eLab which was an early applied anthropology studio. Sapient acquired them well before I arrived at Sapient, but then my director was part of that ELAB acquisition, and the greater team that I was on was a bunch of alumni from IIT.
Nice.
So I weirdly ended up in this like team, and they were talking about like design thinking and user-centered design and human-centered design. I was like, I don't know what this is. Like but I like you, and I like the work you're doing. That's really interesting. Like, can I shadow you? Can I help you? Can I work with you on a project? All that kind of stuff. And that's what led me down kind of the transition from brand strategy to more, I don't know.
To
this. Yeah.
Well, we don't have a name for it yet.
To design strategy, to user experience, to human-centered design.
Why do we have to say that many names?
Yeah.
I have a slide that has like 16 monikers for what we do, and just say, we're going to use this one today, but you might hear someone else say this one. So
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we'll figure it out today. We'll see.
Yeah, so I credit that group of people with actually like giving me a like quasi definition of like what I wanted my career to be, because at that point in time I really did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I moved to Chicago because it was exciting to move to Chicago. It was fun.
Because all Minnesotans move to Chicago for a couple years.
It's an easy step.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then like at that point, that kind of set me on a path. I was lucky for Sapient to relocate me to London, so I spent 2 years in London. Super grateful for that experience. Again, international, cultural sensitivity. You think they speak English, so it's going to be easy. Definitely not the case. Not the case. I wouldn't say it was more challenging than moving to a place that doesn't speak English, but there were absolutely cultural things to overcome and navigate. After that, moved to Seattle. Joined a startup nonprofit focused on helping first-time entrepreneurs. So very meta, like startups on startups. But the connection to human-centered design there was like, when you think about starting a new company, like how do you know that you're solving a problem that is worth solving? How do you know that your idea is a good way to solve that problem? How do you do that with no time and no money? As like, the average person up the street who maybe is like an aspiring entrepreneur. You have an expertise, obviously, in business, or you're a developer or designer, or so on. But so to me, that was like it was human-centered design in a different set of constraints, right? And true scrappy constraints. And weirdly, that set me up to then go to Target and US Bank, where we were in corporate innovation. Like there was a lot of language like, oh, we are startups inside of big companies, which is a triggering statement for me, but I will leave it at that, and just say the practices that we were working through, rapid prototyping, rapid timelines, like low resources, high ambiguity, all of those kind of forces were ripe and relevant, at both Target and US Bank. And so it was that blend of experience that then brought me to those two places.
And then can you talk about your Target stint and what you ended up working on?
Yeah.
That was kind of
Target was
Target
was it was a journey too.
Yeah.
It was super positive and amazing learning experiences on a number of levels. But where I ended up working was in an initiative called Food Future, which was a collaboration between Target, MIT Media Lab, and IDEO. And was, I would say, like a pretty big step away from, or like, I guess, in pursuit of things beyond Target's core business. The topic was food, but specifically like food systems and food transparency, like kind of big food, not necessarily creating new food products to sell at Target, which I love, by the way. And so we, in collaboration with MIT Media Lab and IDEO, each of the groups kind of brought, the way we talked about was we each have our superpowers, right? And we're going to bring these superpowers together and kind of take on these big, hairy, audacious problems and topics. And ultimately with a goal towards like creating what we call ventures and things that did drive commercial value for Target or as standalone entities, but we're also trying to solve huge human problems, systemic problems in some cases. Very wild experience. I think, if I'm being honest about it, on one hand, like amazing intention, and also when you talk about like core business versus adjacent business versus like very far horizon business, we probably jumped a little too far at that time, which isn't to say like don't be bold, like don't take risks, like we should absolutely do those things, but it just kind of illustrates the challenge of corporate innovation, which is when you take those risks and at that same time Target's core business was not doing amazingly well, and so then the appetite for risk, the appetite for boldness shrinks little by little when that happens, and then you start to talk about the runway and how much time you need to drive value, commercial value, and ultimately the initiative was shut down. So yeah, lots of learning experiences about how to navigate kind of disruptive corporate innovation, and amazing relationships built. Still in touch with a number of the folks that are on that team. And like you mentioned, we did get to go to the White House, and I have a whole story that's maybe too long for the podcast about driving a U-Haul from Boston to Washington, D.C. with a bunch of hydroponic plants in the back and going through the security protocol that the White House demands, which was an adventure and still is probably the weirdest thing I've ever done in a job. So, yeah. Shout out to Tommy, who was my co-pilot on that road trip.
I want our listeners to realize that you have done human-centered design. I can't find where I put my notes. And like the fact that you've worked on hydroponics. Here it is. U.S. Bank expense reports. Flex and seal packaging for 3M that like is out on the market today. Like apps for athletics. Bras and leggings at Nike. It's amazing the variety of different products and like altitudes that you've worked at.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you're using the same tools and techniques for all these.
Yeah, I would say that's those steps have been fairly on purpose, actually.
Okay.
For better or for worse. Yes, like the techniques and the tools and the mindset and the thinking and the attitude has remained like relatively consistent, right? Obviously, like new methods emerge, new tools emerge, and so on. I admittedly get nervous about pigeonholing too tightly, and so I think that's like a fear-based force to some degree. But the flip side of that is more of an optimism-based force, which is to say that like innovation and creativity comes from adjacencies. And so if I'm working in footwear now, what can I learn from banking? Are there weird, less obvious ways that banking or financial services are navigating like a weird economic climate like we're in today that's helping them succeed? What about, Target's grocery business? Like, what are they doing that is helping them win? 3M, same thing. Like, if you look outside and you look horizontal outside of your business unit, is that actually a better way to get to kind of competitive differentiation than it is to look inside your industry? Because I think if you only look inside your industry, you end up in kind of a little bit of a copycat or like keeping up with the Joneses situation where you're not really pushing the boundaries on things. You're just read and react, responding to what your key competitors are doing. Which, don't get me wrong, like that is important. That is super important. You cannot not pay attention to the competition. But again, like it comes back to like, okay, so how are we going to differentiate? How are we going to like set ourselves apart from them? I think that looking horizontally is a great place to do that. So I don't know. Like I said, it's a little bit of both, and being able to like apply problem solving in lots of different contexts, like be versatile. That's something I pride myself on. I guess is like my ability to be versatile, to learn a new industry or learn a new business fairly quickly. And it's interesting, you get to learn a lot about the world, I guess, and how it works.
So I interrupted you. I mean, we paused at hydroponics.
Oh, at Target. Yeah, US Bank was after Target. Spent a lot of time thinking about expense reports, which probably is triggering people as they listen to it. But it was a really interesting topic. We were trying to make expense reporting less painful, especially for the people who don't actually have to do it that frequently. So if you think about it, like if you're traveling every week, you know how to do your expense reports. You know how to optimize, right, for that. If you only do an expense report twice a year, you got to even remember, like, what's that system called that I have to log into to be able to do this? Like, where is my corporate card in the first place? Do I even have a corporate card? If I don't have a corporate card, I have to front the cash to like buy dinner for myself or buy a $2,000 hotel in New York City, for a conference or whatever. Like, the pain for those people is actually higher than it is for the frequent traveler. And the risk for the institution is also higher because with corporate cards, there's constraints. And with your personal card, there is not. So we'll leave that out.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah. Very interesting topic. And then Strava was after US Bank. And that was very driven by, I kind of alluded to it earlier, right? We talked about innovation teams and a lot of language about we're a startup within a company. And I guess I just started wondering, like, are we? Like, what does it actually mean to work for a startup? And so I sought out a startup that I was like personally passionate about, which I'm a runner. I've been a runner for my whole life, since middle school at least. Was an early user of the Strava platform, and so just kind of started looking around, and there happened to be a user research role open that I applied for and had a connection through, and managed to get to go.
When it was a startup?
I mean, yes, I would call it I guess it depends on your definition of a startup. At that point in time, Strava was already, I want to say, 10 years old.
Okay.
So if your definition of a startup is a time-based definition, then maybe not. If your definition of a startup is like a kind of business sustainability-based definition, I would say it absolutely was. Like, at that point in time, Strava, I like to call it, when I was there, I would say Strava was in puberty. That it was like not a kid, not a grown-up, somewhere in between, and was trying to come to terms with several decisions in terms of what its future path would be. And during my time there, I mean, this is all public information and indicative of where it was. When I started, we had a CEO. Shortly after I started, that CEO was exited. A founder came back to lead the company. While I was there, we made a massive paywall shift. So a good percentage of the product that had been free was then moved behind the paywall, which, as you can imagine, is not an easy thing to communicate to end users, especially end users who are as passionate about Strava as Strava's user base is. It turns out runners and cyclists especially are extremely passionate about, running and cycling in general, but that the role Strava plays. And so I think those bigger picture things that happened are indicative of where that company was at the time. And I was an early user researcher trying to affect specific products within that context. And so, I would call that a startup, and I got that experience at both the kind of just living through that period of time, as well as affecting the enhancements of existing features and launching new features. So the new feature that I worked on that I'm super proud of is called Local Legends. It is a competition based on frequency, how often you are running or riding in any given location, versus the kind of historical competition that existed within Strava, which is called segment leaderboards, and that is about speed, raw speed. How fast are you compared to everyone else who has traversed this part of the world? And so it was a great experience because we got to kind of start with a kernel of competition and evolving competition, but also felt very noble. Like, we were trying to make this an inclusive competition that anybody can compete on and win at and be celebrated for, while also literally trying to get people to run more or ride more, right? Like, if you, as a runner and a rider, all you want to do is be out there more. So like, here's a nudge, a reason to go run around your block 10 times. And
so what problem did you help solve? Didn't you kind of
Yeah, it was the challenge with segment leaderboards, the speed-based competition. One of the challenges was that, and it kind of alludes to Strava's existence for 10 years, right? Like the longer you exist, the more people can compete at those things. And in many instances, the kind of top of the leaderboard was becoming like, we weren't able to participate anymore, right? Like, especially in high traffic areas like New York City or San Francisco, where pro riders or semi-pro riders are going down this hill or whatever, the top however many spots are taken out by people you're never, ever going to beat. And so there was a challenge that is exciting to some degree. You can see these people that you admire running and riding in the same places as you, and like put yourself into context of their performance at that place. But you also can't win or even compete in some places. So the challenge we were pushing for was really a challenge around inclusivity and trying to enable competition beyond speed for more people. So that's what I would call the core of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Strava then.
After Strava was Nike. And so, yeah, I came to Nike. My role when I arrived, I like to say I always had one foot in brick and mortar stores and one foot in digital. That's where I started. So we worked on, again, like kind of the four walls and in was our kind of nucleus of work of Nike's brick and mortar stores. Everything from creative conceptual work to like the user experience of a sign, I guess you could say, and departments. And so we worked on things like the footwear wall and how you shop for shoes. We've been working on bras and leggings and things like that lately. So, yeah.
Seijen, where is our field going? Where are things going?
Whew. Where are things going? Yeah.
Or what are you excited about? What are you scared about when it comes to this field?
Yes. That's a tough
Those
question.
are three completely different big questions.
Yeah.
But you get to choose one.
No, I don't know if I have a tight answer. I mean, I guess like the first thing that I maybe acknowledge the context of the moment a little bit, right? So what context are we in? Being on a team that was called experience research, but really was like a user experience research team. I'm getting into my own trap of like using words. Mm-hmm. One of the articles that made the rounds in our team was, I think it was called like the Research Reckoning or something like that. It was a reflection on what felt like a large scale series of layoffs that disproportionately affected user experience researchers in Silicon Valley and at tech companies. I don't have any factual evidence to say that it did or didn't, but it was a perception, right? And the article started to explore like, why was that? Like, why do we feel like it has been like that? And I think that sparked this interesting conversation about proving your value. Which I don't want to say that is what scares me necessarily, because it's not a fear-based thing. I think it's a really important thing to recognize, which is that like this field grew like a lot over the last 2 decades. And so maybe coming back to that original conversation of like how do we describe our jobs? Like, I think if we're not careful, we will describe our jobs in terms that don't resonate with business leaders, basically. And maybe that's like too business-centric of a point of view to take, but I think for someone like me, for example, who works currently at a pretty big public enterprise, to not acknowledge that feels like I'm walking into like the lion's den a little bit in a naive way. And so I think that's maybe why I'm so sensitive to the words, is like to say like, well, we are in service of a number of different things. Like we're in service, like I have a full-time job, I am in service of the business. Like I need to acknowledge that existence and figure out how I'm going to help that business succeed. I also am trying to serve people, right? I'm trying to serve humans, and the tension, like I think sometimes the tension between the business and the people like gets adversarial almost in tone, and I'm like, no. Like it should not be that way. Like we have to acknowledge both and be really honest about like, okay, yes, we want to serve people, but we can only serve you in a certain type of way with the resources we have and the capabilities we have, and maybe that means we can't build you that thing. As opposed to like dying on the sword of being like, wow, but humans need this, you know, and you're like, yes, like that truth is true. And also like maybe we're not the best company to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm answering your question per se, because
I'm so glad you brought this up, this tension, because it sounds like, do you feel it personally too?
I don't know that I feel it like, I don't know that I feel the tone that I just described necessarily, though I have picked it up, I guess, in individual conversations. And I think more strongly with certain individuals who feel more passionately about it, you know, one way or another. And it's hard, like, because I understand why certain people feel that way. I mean, I have felt that way, right, in certain instances. And so, but when you talk about the future of the practice, you know, there's kind of, I guess, two ways to look at that, in my opinion. There's the like methodological future, right, and thinking about things like generative AI and computer vision and the literal ability to gather evidence or data and analyze it and make meaning out of it and tell people what to do. And like, I don't feel comfortable like predicting that world, because it feels truly like we are at a inflection point moment where I'm like, whoa, like I don't know. You know, I'm dabbling myself at a personal level with all these things and trying to learn as I go. But yeah, that the tool set and how I think will undergo a significant evolution. But I'm more concerned about the kind of existential side of it. It's like why does this practice exist? Like, how do we ensure that we are positioned, I guess, to exist in the future and like communicate our purpose a little bit. So maybe title is really important, actually. Maybe words are becoming more important as we talk. So
I know, I started to think like maybe the moniker is important to communicate our value. Because do you also struggle with like a title or explaining to people that aren't in our industry what you and I do?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I actually tend in the past I would tend to say like, I work on Nike stores rather than say I do experience research, for example. Like, what does that mean? You know, if I frame it in terms of what they know and experience, they're like, oh, okay, I get it. I've been to a Nike store. I've been to Chicago. You know, been to New York, whatever.
I know I have my answer for like a neighbor or like someone that is in the industry and someone that really is in the industry.
Yeah, even at Strava, I work on Strava.
Yeah.
You know, like that was a little more straightforward because it is like a product, you know. Or I would say I work on segment reports, you know, and they're like, oh, I love segment reports. Or not, you know, they strong opinions.
Yeah.
So I found myself talking in those terms.
Because I always say you don't become we're not lawyers or doctors or accountants.
Yeah. I guess it's like, what do you do day to day versus what is the end application? I think the answer probably does change for who you're talking to, I guess, like depending on what they're interested in. But I don't know. My bias right now is towards the end application and thinking about how I enable those outcomes with the choices or the decisions rather than the how, I guess you could say. But I don't know, maybe that's disrespecting human-centered design a little bit, like I don't mean to. Sorry. Don't come at me.
Human-centered design police?
Yeah, exactly. Don't chase me down.
They don't exist.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, how do you describe what you do and what you're got to create your
I mean, right now, I would say I have to use an analogy, which maybe is the point of how difficult it is, but I used to say, until recently, right, I would describe it as very, like, on the ground altitude, right, like, to the point of, like, the little sign underneath the shoe, like, we were thinking in really detailed ways. And now I am on a space station looking down at Earth, trying to understand the movements of weather and people and storms and comets coming from outer space, and really looking at the big picture and trying to understand why those movements are happening. So, I don't know.
What does your name mean again?
Seijen?
Yeah.
International person. Yeah.
I like it.
I think it actually translates literally into worldly, but worldly in a literal worldly, you go around the world sense, but I feel uncomfortable saying the word worldly because it sounds a little...
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly are. This has been, I feel like through your job and through talking, we can see the sense of how you are pretty worldly.
I appreciate that.
Everything you touch, or just the variety of what you've been doing.
Yeah.
That's really incredible.
I mean, it's kind of funny, right? Because that was the problem for me in high school, even in college, was just I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just tried it all. The logic behind that was just by trying a wide variety of things, I will eventually understand what I want to do, because I will say I like that and I don't like that.
Yeah.
It turned out that, I mean, maybe that has happened a bit. I have some focus, I think I've been lucky to land in a topical space, Nike, Strava, that I'm passionate about, running, sports, athletics, all that kind of stuff. These are research or insights or whatever we're calling this field is something that is fun and interesting to me. But as we just described, hit a lot of places along the way, and I'm still very interested in many, many topics. So,
Final question: advice for somebody young just getting out of school that wants to work in this field or do some of the things you've done.
That's a good question. I guess maybe there's two high-level pieces of advice. One is just, I don't know, immerse, / consume. And what I mean by immerse and consume is take in culture, go and experience a lot of different things, shop at different places, participate in different activities, interact with different people, force yourself to just get a very broad sense of experiences in your personal life. Because I think that builds the compare and contrast capability, I guess you could say. Without points of reference, I think it's really hard to do this job. And to say over here it's this, and that's why this is unique in this situation, I've been thinking a lot about comparison and the value of comparison, which maybe is, I don't know, maybe it's a dumb moment for other people, but that without basis for comparison, it's really hard to detect meaning. And so being really thoughtful about what it is that you're comparing against or with, to the point of looking horizontal, this is how it is in footwear, but this is how it is in banking, and this is how it is in digital products, and this is how it is in physical products. That's how you get to true signal, I think, and meaning. And so immersing yourself in the world, I think, is a great way to do that. The other one is
international.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, travel. Go to different
worldly
countries.
Man. I just keep thinking of your name and how it really, they were prophets for sure.
Yep.
In what they.
Shout out to my parents.
Yep. Okay, what was the second?
I mean, the second one is maybe, I don't know if this is good advice or not, but I started my career working on the agency side and the consulting side, and I'm really grateful and thankful for that experience, even though for the past decade I haven't been on that side. And the reason is maybe just a compounding of my first comment, which is that you get exposed to a lot of really different situations in a really intense way in a very short period of time. The expectations are high, the intensity is high, and that can be really hard, but it forces you to learn. And I think there's just an urgency, and if you think about, I think about Ira Glass, one of the questions you had previewed with me was heroes, and I don't know if I would classify Ira Glass as a hero, but he's someone that I admire, and I'm a huge This American Life fan, and I've seen him speak live, and there's an interview with him where he talks about the craft of his work. And he talks about like the only way from his perspective to get the craft is volume, like doing it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and refining a little bit every single time along the way. And he even goes as far as to say like his own work in the early days was awful. Like he's basically like, this was really bad, but the only way I got to good is by doing a lot of bad work and by having some people like basically tell me that my work was bad and like get it better and better and better and better and better. I feel like working on the agency side or the consulting side, it's not the only way to achieve that volume, but it is a way to achieve the volume, I guess. And you know, I think about my own time, and I worked on Gatorade. I worked on or Lucozade, I guess, the UK equivalent to Gatorade. I worked on blood donation services. I worked on gambling houses. I worked on automotive. I worked on core retail. I worked on CPG. You know, like, how many different topics did we explore? And also like everything from a B2B food service delivery, you know, it's like, and you use all these different methods and all these different like horizons of work, and in 5 years, like that was truly foundational. Like it really set me on a course. I mean, obviously then I did more breadth, but like it really set me on a course of like foundational skills in a short period of time. It was almost like grad school, you know. Only I got paid a little more than I would have gotten paid in grad school. So I don't know, that would be I think they're kind of the same advice actually. It's like immerse yourself in your personal life and then don't be afraid, especially in your early career years, to go intense for a period of time before you have 2 kids and you're not sleeping through the night. So because it's a much harder intensity to manage.
Yes.
So.
Oh, this has been amazing. I love learning from you. Thank you so much. We will talk to you again, I'm sure, because there's a lot of great ideas, a lot of really, really provocative things that you have me thinking about. Thank you, Seijen.
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me. Thanks for coming to Portland.